ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers from Switzerland and in the United States. On behalf of the Europa Institute at the University of Zurich, I would like to welcome you to the 7th Zurich lecture at the University of Zurich. The aim of this event, which we are organizing in cooperation with the support of the Zurich Insurance Group, that's why it's called Zurich Lecture, is to discuss common issues of common interest between the United States and Switzerland. Different to all previous years, the lecture today will not take place at the Aula Magna of the university, informally called the Churchill Aula, but due to Corona, this lecture will be conducted live online through the internet. We have a professional team that is supporting us, so we are having reasons to believe that this lecture is happening live and simultaneously here in Zurich and in Washington and will work out well. Those roughly 200 viewers which have registered with us ahead of this mission will be able to ask questions during the question and answer session at the end of the lecture via chat. And I will then read out the questions to our participants. Right after me, Francis Bouchard, the Group Head of Public Affairs and Sustainability of the Zurich Insurance Group, our partner today, is going to make some opening remarks. He is also stationed in Washington. You can see from a technical point of view, this conference today is quite demanding. I would now like to invite Francis Bouchard for his introductory remarks. Please, Francis.
Professor Kellerhals, thank you so much. And on behalf of all my colleagues from Zurich Insurance Group, both in Switzerland as well as all around the world, I want to welcome everybody to this lecture. I want to start with some thanks. Clearly, the first thanks need to go to the ambassador for making time to participate in this. Any posting where you're having a transition in government must be challenging, this one in particular, and to take some time out of your schedule to join us today is very much appreciated. I'd also like to express my gratitude and thanks to Professor Kellerhals and his entire team. As he indicated, these things are not easy to assemble, and the team has been wonderful in terms of organizing it. I'd also like to echo my disappointment in ways that we're not gathered in the Aula Magna or the Churchill Aula. When you're in that room, you can almost sense that the walls have seen history, and they kind of set an ambition level for these type of conversations that sometimes we meet, sometimes we don't, but it really is quite an august place to be, and I miss it for this event for sure. But thank you again for Andy and the team for making this happen. And then of course to thank the audience. 200 people to spend an hour or so with us at this in this format. It's quite a commitment. I know there are other events you can dial into, and we really appreciate you spending time with us. A little bit about the lecture series, as Professor Kellerhals has already said, we started in 2014. We really initiated this to help foster and promote a common understanding between the sister republics of the United States and Switzerland. For Zurich, we are truly a transatlantic company with about 90% of our business either in Europe or in the United States. So for us, the ability to share knowledge around the economic or the social ties or the political alignment, the cultural, it's even personal for us. I personally have had the incredible fortune and honor to be able to live in Switzerland several times. And throughout the company, there are those kind of personal ties between Switzerland and the United States that are quite prevalent. So we're thrilled to be able to celebrate those relationships between Switzerland and the United States through these lectures. Over the years, we have invited judicial leaders. We had Anton Scalia, one of the Supreme Court justices. We had his dear friend and judicial counterpart, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who we affectionately in the United States call the notorious RBG, still to this day. We also had Samuel Alito, another jurist on the Supreme Court, speak at this conference before. We've also had luminaries from the media world, Judge Napolitano and ubiquitous spokesperson and commentator Tony Fratto. And over the last couple of years, deliberately or not, we've kind of moved into the diplomatic corps. And last year, we were incredibly honored to have a dear friend of all of ours, U.S. Ambassador to Switzerland, Ed McMullen, speak. And of course, this year, we'll have his counterpart in Ambassador Pitteloud. Before I hand it off to the ambassador, though, I just want to make one quick observation, and it really is a bit about the physical nature of this meeting, but also the incredible and extraordinary point in time that we have this call or this meeting. I'm sitting a mile from the ambassador, but I've been banished to my basement for 8 months. And I think there are really two lessons I take away from 2020 that perhaps are relevant for why and what we're going to do here today. One is that it's really demonstrated how many of the things we perhaps take for granted in life are fragile. You think about public health systems, you think about the ability to see your family and loved ones and friends. You think about you probably don't even think about going to work and coming back every day. You don't think about, perhaps the challenges to some of the more vulnerable parts of society as often as we perhaps should. All of these things were called into question in 2020. Every one of them was tested. But on the flip side, and I think this is a bit of the surreal nature of the experience we're all going through, the other learning to me is the resilience of the institutions we rely on. If you had told me a year ago that we were going to go through this and it would be this dramatic effect on public health, on the economy, et cetera, I would have questioned whether we would have had the ability to do this. But the economy, in many respects, continues to perform. Public health has responded remarkably to the challenges put before them. Families have grown closer, perhaps even while being further apart. And of course, government and the institutions of government we're going to talk about today as well. So, to me, that juxtaposition between the fragility and resilience are lessons to be learned from the experience that the world has gone through over the last 8 or 9 months. And therefore, I think it's the ideal timing for us to hear from someone like Ambassador Pitteloud, who has such a thoughtful and informed approach to not only world events, but in his current role in the United States. And his focus on, the human side of this, of governing and diplomatic relationships, I think will serve us well as we hear his remarks. So with no further ado, Ambassador Pitteloud, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Francis. Thank you, Professor Kellerhals. One of the first things we have learned over the past few months is to start every meeting with the question, can you hear me? I hope you do. Okay, so you can hear me. So let me start. It's an incredible honor to be virtually in the aula magna of my alma mater, the University of Zurich. And not in my wildest dreams would I have thought that I would ever be, even virtually, asked to speak in a place that is so replete with history and with significance, historical significance. And when I was listening to the list of speakers you've had before me, to say that it is humbling, it would be a very British understatement. It is very humbling indeed. The year 2020 has truly been an annus horribilis, I think, for all of us, for the economy, for politics. It has been a very disruptive year. We have learned a lot. We have suffered a lot. We have been living in basements and being forced to move into a totally different way to interact with other human beings. And the experience was certainly a positive one. And like most positive experiences, we learn to really appreciate them once they're over. So I can't wait to see this thing being over. That said, the year 2020 also created an incredible disruption in international politics. Frankly, in January of this year, President Donald Trump was cruising towards re-election. The economy was doing extremely well in the United States of America. The unemployment rate was at its lowest since decades. The average salary, also including the low salaries in the American economy, they were consistently going up. And we would not, and frankly, I would not have bet a cent on a Democratic victory in November 2020. But the particularity of black swans, and I'm an ornithologist and I've seen a few black swans in nature, but the particularity of black swans is that they do create a totally new environment, and suddenly everything changes. We were confronted, and I know that many people in the, let's say, in the intellectual circles do not like the comparison, but basically we were for the first time in decades living in a war situation. A war situation is a situation where you will have to make choices, and all the choices are wrong. You decide to protect the economy, people will die. You decide to protect the people will die too, but they will die for other reasons because the economy is going down the drain. All the politicians, and we have been frankly facing a generation of politicians lately that were used to kick the real difficult questions down the road. Kick the can down the road, and we could speak about the reform of the pension system or whatever. It would be for the next politician to solve. But suddenly they were facing a situation where you have to make a decision. Even not to make a decision is to make a decision. So suddenly everyone was confronted with a war-type situation where people were going to die. And that's a situation where you need clearly a commander-in-chief. You need a commander-in-chief, you need someone who is going to make the tough decisions and then defend them and then coordinate them at the national level. And frankly, if we look at the performance of this administration during COVID, it's probably when they started losing the November election. Let's face it, the American system, and the American system, which is extremely federalist, doesn't make it easy to coordinate a response at the national level. And as you certainly know, the states in the United States have a lot of competencies. There are always discussions about the level at which the federal government can intervene. So it would be absolutely unfair to put the whole responsibility for the suboptimal, let's say, approach to the crisis that appeared in the United States. But at the same time, there should have been at least a coordinated and consequent and clear response at the federal level. It didn't happen, and that's when this administration started to really lose the trust, lose the confidence, lose the trust of a majority of the American people. There was a second black swan event. Or was it really a black swan? No, it was a usual event, and it was the death of George Floyd and the BLM movement, and the rise of the BLM movement in the United States of America. And once again, it could have been turned by this administration to its advantage. And there we could witness how the president decided to pander more to his traditional base, instead of being the unifier. And it could have given him a stature that would have guaranteed some sort of re-election. It didn't happen. And so to me, frankly, as an observer, as an outside observer who was not politically involved in a bipartisan or in a bipartisan sense of the thing, to me it was clear by mid-May that the president had lost the election. And I said so. To me, there was no way, except another black swan, that he could recover the lost ground that he had lost in May. But he came close. He came actually pretty close, and closer than we would have thought. There have been a series of failures in the way the COVID crisis has been approached in this country, and we could speak about the many failures of other countries, and it's not just the United States. Certainly, I mentioned it was difficult for this administration to have a unified response because of the tensions between the people who believe in science and the people who don't. And by abiding by the wishes of the people who believe in science, you would have alienated a large part of the traditional electorate of President Trump that were not terribly happy with, let's say, the Earth being round and vaccines not being a plot by Marxist pedophiles to overcome the resistance of the true patriots. So at some point, we had these tensions. So there was no unified response. then it was an awfully long time until Congress managed to get a relief package. The first relief package came in time, just in time. The economy was picking up again, but it was much too long, and both parties, frankly, played a dangerous game, including the Democrats, who were asking for things. They were using the opportunity to ask for things that they would never have gotten otherwise, and trying to push it, so creating even more resistance on the Republican side, instead of trying to find common ground and create a relief package that would have worked properly. So the crisis showed clearly that it was extremely difficult for members of Congress and for politicians in general in this country to overcome the polarization that has become one of the trademarks of American politics. And mind you, not just of American politics. We can see polarization all over the world happening again and again. So COVID plus Black Lives Matter, to me, were the two factors that really doomed the administration, the Trump administration, to be a one-term administration. Meanwhile, on the other side, on the Democrat side, there was initially, when the primaries started, the general assumption that these primaries were anyway an exercise in futility, because everyone knew that President Trump was going to win anyway, and that was before COVID. It explains why the field of potential candidates was, frankly, pretty weak. Mainly people whose last chance it was to get the presidency, or people who were just giving it a try, preparing for a further or later political career, or another try at the presidency. And so for many months, we were witnessing this terrible spectacle of a party tearing itself apart between the left wing, let's say Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Alejandria Ocasio-Cortez wing, and the traditional wing that is more bipartisan, over the aisle, and trying to be more consensual. At some point, you could really see that the party understood that the crisis had created the necessary conditions for them to win, in spite of all the horrible odds they had at the beginning of the year. And so they finally managed to pull themselves together and to put up a consensual candidate in the person of President-elect Joe Biden. And it was the right decision. It was also the right decision to conduct a fairly low-key campaign and to let the other side dig its own grave. So we were totally fascinated observing it from close up, and to see that the election, that the Democratic Party had made a clear choice not to run too visible a campaign, and to let President Trump enter a series of minefields and blow himself apart. It was an interesting approach. For a while, after the summer, the economic recovery, or at least the semblance of economic recovery that we were seeing after the first relief package, made us believe that the president might regain quite a lot of the lost ground, and he did, and he actually did. If we look at the results of the November election, frankly, I don't think that in July we would have bet on such a result in Congress. So it was really amazing to see how the Republicans managed to gain ground again. The problem the White House had to contend with, and was never really able to solve, was that the Republican Party, like the Democratic Party, was also torn between two different wings: the realists, the Reagan Republicans, and then the more, for the sake of caricature, evangelist side, fundamentalist side. So you could listen to science, but not too much, because if you listen to science too much and to Dr. Fauci, you would be attacked by the people who saw wearing a mask as an unacceptable attack on the civil liberties that the forefathers fought so hard to defend. You know, all these things that seemed ridiculous to us until the same kind of ridiculous discussions started in Europe. But that's for another speech. Now, the elections took place, and strangely enough, there was no blue wave. There was no blue wave, and the reason why there was no blue wave, in my personal analysis, was that during the primaries, the Democratic Party had been given quite a left drift by the very strong presence of both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And whether we like it or not, this is not what the American electorate wants. And this is the reason why we saw, as a result, Americans electing Joe Biden as someone who will bring some sort of calm back to American politics and maybe try and decrease the polarization. But it was certainly not a chèque en blanc written to the Democrats to do the kind of politics that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren would have advocated. The reality is, by nature, the American electorate is center-right or center-center, but it's not center-left. And hearing the discussions now around people around the Democratic Party, and especially the Democratic Socialists, claiming that they should have been much more radical, and then they would have won also the election in the House and in the Senate. This is wishful thinking. It would not have happened. So it was probably the right decision to aim for a low-key campaign and not claiming that they were going to reform everything. Is the election over? Frankly, in spite of all the legal shenanigans that are more political posturing than anything else, it's absolutely clear that President-elect Biden has won the election. And most people we speak to in the administration know it is true, and they are preparing for a transition, and they know there will be a transition. There is a need now for a lot of political posturing because there is a very important election, a runoff in Georgia on the 5th of January. And that is the moment when the electorate in Georgia will decide whether the Senate turns blue or let's say blue-purple, and with the voice of the vote of Kamala Harris, it could turn blue, or whether it will remain red. Do I venture an idea of how this is going to turn out? No, I don't. Frankly, it's very open. I think it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to win both seats in Georgia, but it could happen. And I'm not. So maybe after these 4 years of Trump administration, it is probably time to kind of take stock of what happened during these 4 years. And reading the European media, there was, of course, 99% of Trump bashing. Reading the American media that are totally polarized, it was either every day 2 pages of Trump bashing, the 2 first pages of Washington Post and the New York Times, and then Fox News claiming that the president was saving the world and making America great again. There was not much in between. I was in the end resorting to reading The Economist because it's probably the only publication I'm aware of that was trying to really take stock of what was happening in America. Let's face it, there were some successes during the Trump administration. Bringing down the corporate taxes to an average European level, because the reality is that it was brought down to an average European level, not they didn't create a tax haven for companies. They just gave American companies a chance internationally to compete by bringing down the corporate taxes to acceptable levels. It worked. it worked. And in spite of all the people claiming back then that it was a sugar high for the economy, it was not a sugar high for the economy. It was the economy being able to free itself from fiscal shackles that were really destroying its competitiveness. And there, that was most definitely a success. Then there was a wave of deregulation. The wave of deregulation certainly helped the economy thrive, but one should also talk about the price of this deregulation, because especially in the environmental sector, deregulating a lot can help the economy, but it's not necessarily helping the country and its population. So there we have a balanced idea. In foreign policy, President Trump had promised that he would not start a new war. He didn't so far, and there are only a few days left to do so, and I don't think he's going to. So he kept his promise. On China, he confronted openly some aspects of the antagonistic relationship between the two countries that has been on the mind of everyone in Washington, D.C. for quite a few years, but nobody really dared to express it openly. Okay, was it the right decision? That's something we'll certainly have the opportunity to discuss during the Q&A. But confronting China was not necessarily the wrong decision. What was problematic to us in terms of the balance sheet of this administration was the massive weakening of the transatlantic alliance. We need a strong transatlantic alliance. Even we neutrals, we've been traditionally very well protected by NATO. We don't need NATO to be weakened the way it was, though. To be fair, the administration would claim that they reinforced NATO by forcing the members to finally pay their dues in the framework of the burden sharing. That's an open question, but NATO was not at its best. What we suffered from was also the antagonistic relationship with the European Union, because as you know, Switzerland having one of the world's most integrated economies, when you slap tariffs on the European Union, even if Switzerland is accepted from the tariffs, in the end, you're hit by the sanctions all the same. It was not terribly helpful. It was not terribly necessary. And what we lacked during those years was a spiritus rector, someone who would realize on one hand, you want to have allies to confront China, and on the other hand, you are antagonizing all your friends by slapping tariffs here, tariffs there, creating trade war with Mexico, with Canada, with in the end, one has to make choices and to decide where to put priorities. And this lack of setting priorities was definitely something that was worrying to us. The bilateral relationship under the Trump administration was really extraordinary. In the sense that never in history have Swiss politicians and Swiss diplomats had access at such a level to American decision makers. It was mostly due to a peculiar alignment of stars that made it possible through personal relationship and whatever to have access, but it was a level of access that we've never had before, and we might never have again. It helped us in certain situations to avoid a situation where Switzerland will become a collateral casualty of measures that were taken against other countries. It was really helpful and really interesting. But now we are homing, or we are going towards a situation where we will have a divided government. We will most probably have a divided government in the US, with the Democrats in the White House, but the Republicans able to control largely what's happening in Congress. What does it mean? It means, first of all, that we will have a very long confirmation process. As you know, within a normal American administration, there are about 4,000 political appointees, out of which around 1,200 have to be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. You can imagine we are not out of the woods. until we have a functioning Biden administration with people who have been confirmed and they are not just acting, it might be months, quite a few months. It also means that a Republican-dominated Senate will most certainly block any attempt to put some of the left wing of the Democratic Party in key positions. It's not going to happen. So I do not see Elizabeth Warren at Treasury, for instance. So that was one of the names that was being mentioned. This divided government doesn't only mean a long confirmation process, it also does mean that there will probably be no extreme legislation passed, because it will just not pass the hurdles of Congress. So it is rather good news for the economy. I do not see huge increases in taxes, and I do not see a huge regulatory machinery being put in place. What's going to change with the Biden administration? Well, most probably we will see more emphasis on human rights and on the environment. And there, expect again the kind of regulations we had under the Obama administration. It might not necessarily be good for the economy, but it will certainly be good for the quality of the air and of the water and of the environment in general in this country. Expect the US to rejoin the Paris Agreement very quickly. That should be possible in a matter of weeks, and there we will see changes. What we will see in terms of changes, or positive changes too, is we will see the US restoring and reshoring the relationship with both the EU and the Atlantic Alliance. It's definitely going to happen, and it's good news. It's good news to us, Switzerland. It's good news for Europe in general. It's good news for the world in general too. We certainly will see an improvement of the relationship with Cuba, because the Trump administration had decided to go on a very hard line towards the Cuban regime. And frankly, I don't think this is going to endure. So we will see a situation where the relationship will improve. We might see a deterioration of the relationship with both Russia and Brazil. With Russia, I was about to say cynically, because many people still do not. I'm not terribly happy to have been robbed of their victory in 2016 and feeling that it was Russia's fault. I'm not going to say whether it was, and I don't know whether it was, but many people feel it was. And certainly with Brazil, where President Bolsonaro, who had an excellent relationship with President Trump, will probably struggle to have the same kind of quality relationship with President Biden. Expect no major changes with Mexico. The Mexican president was fairly happy strangely enough, he liked President Trump very much. He took him a very, very long time to do the congratulation tweet. So Mexico will remain a country that is, as they say, very far away from God and very close to the United States of America. Expect no major change in the China policy, because the Trump administration has broken the dam of people actually naming the problem by its name, of a country that's both a member of the club and not playing by the rules of the club. And now that the confrontation has started, it's going to go on. So maybe it could be in a more mundane tone and in a more diplomatic manner, but the confrontation with China is here to stay. For us, my hope is that we will not go back to the traditional situation where Switzerland is the object of what I would call benign neglect. We are not big enough to be really important. We are not troublesome enough to warrant the attention of the White House. I think this is wrong. I think that's not how it should be. I think we deserve we deserve the attention of US politics, be it only because of our economic significance on the American market. Let's face it, we are the sixth biggest investor into the American economy. And in terms of research and development, we are the biggest investor into the American economy, bigger than Germany, bigger than anyone, bigger than China. So we are not just a small country. We are very, very important bilateral trade partner to this country, and also in terms of the exchange of intellectual property, the academic exchanges, creation of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, Swiss companies, depending on how you calculate, but there are 750,000 jobs who are depending on Swiss companies in the US. It makes us more than just a small country that one can, see from time to time and greet politely. We are much bigger than we look. Do we also have a lot of common values with the United States of America? Of course, we believe in a free market. We believe in quality education. We believe in a level playing field in the economy. We believe in creativity. This is something that's not going to change with the Biden administration. And with the Biden administration, we also share, maybe at a higher level than with the previous administration, certain values on human rights, on the environment, on the future green economy, and what it means for the future of the world. So there is a lot that does unite our two sister republics. And this is what we intend to build on, to try and keep the relationship at the level of intensity that we had during the last 4 years. Now, you mentioned just before that one of the previous speakers was Ambassador Ed McMullen. I would like to take this opportunity to say that Ambassador McMullen has been a great US ambassador to Switzerland. And sometimes, frankly, I had the feeling he was the Swiss ambassador to the US because he was defending the interests of Switzerland with gusto. I mean, I was so impressed. He did a great job, and he has been a great friend of Switzerland. And it shows once again, that it's not always the wrong decision to have a political appointee in Bern, because a political appointee has the kind of contacts that a career diplomat in a mid-sized country would never have. So here we are. I would like to of course, to open the floor for discussion and to say it has been a fascinating 2020. If you thought that 2020 was interesting, you are going to love 2021 because it's going to be fun too. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you so much for this great and clear presentation and the overview on the present situation in the United States after the election. We very much appreciate your comments. Now, let's turn to a couple of questions in the question and answer session. Maybe I might start with the first question. You mentioned the deep division in the US society between Democrats and Republicans. Do you believe that a President-elect Biden will be able to bring those two camps closer together and in a way to unify the Americans again?
I think it's going to be extremely difficult because both parties have been using the so-called culture war to push their political interests and also to keep their electorate happy and busy with other things. So on one hand, the Republican Party concentrating on questions of belief, like abortion, like flat earth or not, like vaccines, like the priority of science over God's words, and thus mobilizing people, but also creating an atmosphere of deep distrust towards the traditional authorities. On the other hand, let's say that the left wing of the Democratic Party keeping everyone busy with tearing down the statues of former Confederate officers and rewriting American history à la façon de Oliver Stone, which means the US is the absolute embodiment of evil, worse than the Nazis and whatever. So we have to beat our chest all the time about all the evil that we have created in this country. And it has had a very strong mobilizing factor. It's actually terrifying to see how many people on the left think that 71 million Americans who voted for President Trump are fascists, militarists, white supremacists, militia extremists, and how many people on the right think that 76 million Americans voted for Marxist, globalist pedophiles who are trying to sell the United States to some sort of international conspiracy. Once you have created this dynamic, it's very difficult to go back. It's very difficult to go back to acknowledging that your political adversary is not an enemy of the country, that your political adversary is not a dangerous, whatever, fascist or Marxist, and to acknowledge that everyone, that the vast majority of the people who voted on both sides are just American patriots who just differ on the way of how they think that the country should be run, but they love this country and they would like this country to go forward. Personally, I do set really great hopes in the personality of President-elect Biden, who traditionally has been someone who was able to work across the aisle to create the kind of consensus of, but to put it bluntly, what the US needs now is a Nelson Mandela and not a Robert Mugabe. Okay, so the US is in need of comfort, of intellectual comfort, of going back to the roots. And it's not an easy task. It's definitely not an easy task.
In your view, what is the role the medias can or should play? I mean, we saw in this division that many watched CNN, that was very one-sided, or you watched Fox, was on the other side. Even during this campaign, could you go so far to say, because the medias were so biased, was it maybe even an unfair election because people couldn't really inform themselves in a neutral way?
I would be really wary of speaking of an unfair election, because as far as we could witness, and we had also electoral observers on the ground and everywhere, we could see that actually everything went according to the books. There was no cheating. But if you speak about the phase prior to the election, yes, indeed, it was really difficult to have access to unbiased information. Because there were very few media that would try to be more or less objective on what was happening, and they were, sorry, excuse my French, but they were elite media like the Wall Street Journal and the Economist, and their influence on the American voter is zero. But the mainstream media were extremely polarized. And this is actually a pity, and there is definitely a need for these media to go back to more professional journalism. And the way Fox News reported on the election, on the night of the election, gave me, some hope that the more extreme forms of journalism will be again banned to extreme media outlets like Breitbart or others, but that the main television channels and maybe the main newspapers will be able again to go back to a more balanced reporting, because it was tough to find balanced opinions, and it went so far that at some point, I don't know whether you recall the incident or whether you knew about the incident, but the New York Times decided to give the floor to Senator Tom Cotton, who is definitely one of the hardline Republicans. And next thing you know, the chief editor who had given the green light for Tom Cotton's opinion column was fired, because one should not let these people speak this is not the America we love. This is not the America we believe in. We believe in an America of free speech, and in America where even a center-left newspaper like the New York Times should be able to give the floor to people whose opinion they don't share. It was a little bit of bad experience, frankly.
There's a question coming in from the floor. The question reads, is there a chance to see soon a reform of the election system in the US for which everyone thinks it's really rotten?
I think it's a harsh judgment to say that the system is rotten. The system was devised as to make sure that the smaller states, the states with a smaller population, would have a small competitive advantage. And that is something that we Swiss should understand very well, because our whole system is designed so as to make sure that the bigger cantons do not dominate the whole political life. Yes, there are shortcomings and problems in the electoral system. Reading or watching the European media, you had the feeling that this was the election in Belarus. No, it was not the election in Belarus. In most states, let's say that the states have not been investing a lot of money into the electoral system, so it's antiquated, but it works. There were electoral observers. The counting was slow, but okay, the counting was slow, but the counting was done properly. Will there be a reform of the electoral system? Certainly not under a divided government. So, and anyway, the key elements of the electoral system are in the states, so they depend on the state legislature and the state institutions. So at the federal level, there is not much you can do about the way, let's say, mail-in ballots are counted in Pennsylvania. That's for Pennsylvania to decide. The only thing that could possibly be changed at some point, there are 2 points. Giving the District of Columbia a voice in the presidential election, that would be actually helpful. But you can imagine that with a score of 96%, North Korean score of 96% for Vice President Biden, some people will not be terribly happy to see DC have grand electors. And at the same time, and much more important, a change in the principle going from the grand elector system to a direct election by the people. That I can't see that happening under a divided government, certainly not under this administration.
Thank you very much. There's another question coming in from the floor. The question reads as follows. How does the COVID-19 influence the US-China relations and balance of power, and what role can Switzerland play between the two countries?
Well, probably a very modest one, I would say. No, but okay, COVID has revealed both the strengths and the flaws of both societies, the Chinese and the US society. China has a rigorously organized society with, let's say, few traces of democratic structures, at least as we conceive them, was able to react in a manner that traditionally, totalitarian or autocratic states are able to react faster. So yes, they probably recovered. They obviously recovered faster than the U.S. economy, and at the same time, we could see the shortcomings of the system in terms of freedom of information and of international cooperation and of transparency about the real numbers and all these things. At the same time, we could see the US with a very open discussion about what was going on, but the typical kind of disorganization that is traditional in this country, that's always the way they begin with a crisis. It's the country of Pearl Harbor. Do not forget, this is the country of Pearl Harbor. They start with Pearl Harbor, and then they get their act together. By the way, you might remember that when this crisis started, everyone was saying it is very unlikely that we will have a vaccine in less than 5 years, or maybe never, because for AIDS we never managed, and maybe there'll never be a vaccine. And that was discounting the incredible reactivity of the American science and economy. Because a year later, less than a year later, we have 2 vaccines. That's the strength of the American system. Now, Switzerland in between, that we could try and be the voice of reason, saying it's not about deciding who is the better power. It's not about deciding about the need for one world leader and one superpower. It's about deciding that we all play by the rules. It's a matter of principles. So our partners should be people who play by the rules. And the rules that we agree upon, be it on intellectual property, be it on the way we do trade, be it on the way we treat our population, be it on basic workers' rights, basic human rights. And as long as we play by the rules, we are friends. So it's not about creating a confrontation. It's about saying, hey, let's try and find common ground and come closer. Now, we shouldn't overestimate the influence of Sweden. Of course, we are a country that's much more important than its size would imply. But are we important enough to really be a player in the great powers confrontation? I'm afraid we are not. But that might be, too pessimistic.
All right. So there's another question coming in, and the question reads, what will Biden's election mean for the Swiss-US free trade agreement?
Okay, let me start from the beginning. The Swiss-American free trade agreement was on our wish list for a very long time. Why is that? Because we are Swiss. And because the Swiss people, they like to have things on paper. They like to have some sort of security, and we have signed a contract and we know that the partner is going to abide by the contract. Right now, if you look at the evolution of our trade with the United States of America, I mean, we moved within 20 years from America, the United States being our 4th largest trading partner, to America being our 1st trading partner, bigger than Germany. If you know that's so that this happened without a free trade agreement. But being Swiss, we know that things can change. We know that the winds can get a little bit colder, and then it's good to have things on paper. And this was the main reason why we really wanted this trade agreement. We were almost there. We were almost there last January. Yeah, and then COVID. And if we look at the declared priorities of a future Biden administration, I don't think the free trade agreement with Switzerland is foremost on top of the list, frankly. So we will probably go back to negotiating at a lower level and preparing the ground for later negotiations. I do not see the new USTR and the new Department of Commerce just rushing into, our first priority will now be a free trade agreement with Switzerland. And traditionally, as you certainly know, the Democrats have been a little bit more skeptical towards free trade. And certainly, if free trade, they do prefer regional agreements, including a lot of countries, and not necessarily bilateral ones. So my guess would be this will be on the back burner, at least for a few months, before the outlines of the future trade policy of the Biden administration are better defined.
There's another question coming in that says, how do you explain that in the US, many kind of political questions like abortion or the right to bear guns and so are decided by the courts and not as it might happen in Europe by the parliament? And do you see any chance that the Supreme Court might change here its view and then Biden at the end of the day might pack the court with additional justices?
One of the things that make it really difficult for Europeans to understand what's happening in the US is the fundamental difference in the legal and the constitutional systems. When we speak of government, we speak about the executive. When the Americans speak about government, they are speaking about the machinery of government, which includes the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. If you read Alexis de Tocqueville wrote a very, very interesting analysis of the Supreme Court. It's not in De la Démocratie en Amérique, it's in one of his other books, where he states clearly the Americans are totally different from us because they expect the courts to be an instrument of legislation. So they are doomed, the American system, says Tocqueville, is doomed to try and pack the courts with people who share the ideology of whoever is controlling the White House, because they will try to use the court to push through the courts legislations that they do not manage to get through the normal legislative process. So there is something a little bit disingenuous about the way that the Democrats were howling about President Trump packing the courts. Well, when they had the opportunity, they did exactly the same. And quite a few legislations, like Roe versus Wade, the abortion decision of 1973, were passed by the court and by progressive judges that had been put there by the Democrats because they couldn't pass them through Congress. So it's exactly the way the system works. It's not our system. The constitutional system of the US is fundamentally different from ours. In our system, it is for the legislative powers, ultimately in Switzerland, the people, to decide on fundamental legal questions. And then it's for the courts to interpret. In the US system, it's different. So will we see the Supreme Court overturning some of the major decisions? I would tend to be skeptical. In spite of this Supreme Court being now dominated by the conservatives, usually American Supreme Court judges grow into their role as Supreme Court, and their dedication and their loyalty goes to the Constitution and not to the partisan approach. So we might be surprised. One of the first indications will be whether this Supreme Court, with a now conservative majority, will strike down Obamacare or not. I'm not sure it will. I'm really not sure it will. So we will see. But in fact, courts are seen as a legislative instrument, and this is something that we, the Swiss, definitely struggle to understand.
Would the solution to these problems be that in the US there might be a third political party? Some people, are asking here, why is it so difficult to build a strong third party in the US system?
The last time a serious third political party emerged was when the Republican Party emerged just before the Civil War. And since then, both parties have been making sure, through all kinds of legislative hurdles, that there will be no third party. I do not see, I might be absolutely wrong, but I do not see a third party emerging in the near future. The different, let's say, wings and ideological wings of society will operate within the framework of the two traditional parties. I do not see a third party emerging. The whole system is designed so as to make sure that the bipartisan system survives. I personally do not believe in a third party. The ideological battles are played within the structures of the two main parties. Two extraordinary examples: the New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt moving into taking control of the Democratic Party and turning it into something totally different from what it was prior to 1932. It's amazing how FDR totally changes the nature of the Democratic Party and then goes on to for 3 terms and at the beginning of a fourth one. The same thing with President Trump. and the Tea Party and the predecessors of the predecessors, at least ideologically, of President Trump, Newt Gingrich and others, turning the Republican Party from the Reagan traditional party of business and whatever into something much more ideological and much more reliant on an ideological basis of people who would, by nature, normally would have voted Democrat, and now they're voting Republican. So it's really surprising. So it's always within the system.
Thank you very much, Francis. Bouchard, do you want to step in to have a remark or a question to the ambassador?
It's hard to remark. I mean, he's touched on so many topics, and it's quite a tour de table in terms of the issues. And you can see that and appreciate, and hopefully you value the insights and deep understanding that the ambassador has of the American political system, but also, I think, even deeper, a bit of the American psyche. I guess maybe a question I would ask is from a diplomatic perspective, how does the embassy balance the transition where even within the mechanism itself, the transition hasn't begun? Is it appropriate to open up dialogue with the incoming administration? Do you have to wait until papers are served? Or I just wonder, just on a mechanical level, how does the transition affect the embassy and the work of the embassy?
So to us, it's absolutely obvious that the sooner the better. So we, in spite of transition not having formally started in the White House and in the administration, we acknowledge, our president has already congratulated President-elect Biden. We acknowledge the victory of the Democrats, and we should start working with them as soon as possible. It has been made very difficult by the fact that the Biden administration and the Biden campaign made a very conscious decision because they were afraid of the Logan Act and they were afraid of being accused to be under the influence of foreign diplomats. They decided not to have any contacts with foreign diplomats, and they've been playing really by the rules. So every time we try to speak to them, we get a very polite but firm response saying we don't speak to foreign diplomats until we are given green light. So right now, there is nothing to do but to try and understand who is going to do what. And like the whole biotop within the Beltway, to try and analyze who is going to be Secretary of State, who is going to be Secretary of Commerce, trying to think about how do we get in touch with that person so as to make sure that in due time we will have the right contacts. But it's all virtual, like Zoom. It's definitely virtual. It cannot be practical because it takes two to tango, and I'm dancing alone.
And Andy, if I could, I would maybe reinforce one point the ambassador made, but connect it to a few other points. And that is the expectation that a Biden administration, a Biden State Department, and even its trade policy will be much more focused on multilateral approaches, right? And I think that was, if there was a Trump doctrine in foreign policy, it was bilateral. It was, we never win on a multilateral basis, so let's go bilateral. And where I think you're going to see that, to go back to some of the hot topics out there, is China. I agree completely with the ambassador. I don't think that fundamental objections that the Trump administration raised around the Chinese will change much, but I think the tactics will change fairly dramatically about how the United States engages with China. I think it'll be much more on a multilateral level, but also extend that to climate change. That is an issue that Zurich has been very active in, not just in Europe and Switzerland, but also in the United States. And we're quite encouraged that an administration will take a much more open approach. And I also think it'll lend itself to multilateral action. I mean, the ability for us to achieve, the Paris Accord targets without the United States playing a leadership role is quite slim. So it's quite encouraging that they will step in and start playing a more multilateral leadership role. And then just to reinforce, I believe, the impact on the FTA, if you have the United States really looking for multilateral, the bilateral deals will just not be the priority. So I just want to kind of connect that concept of multilateralism with a few of the other issues that were there as well. Andy, back to you.
Thank you very much, Francis. There's another question. As you mentioned, Ambassador, President Trump does not have a great reputation in Europe. But how is it for you over there? How easy do you have access to the Trump administration? How open is Trump's government for you?
Okay, so you can imagine that as a Swiss ambassador, you usually see the President of the United States on television. And and that's the normal state of affair, because it needs, let's say, another caliber of country to be able to walk into the Oval Office and talk directly to the president as an ambassador. We had, under the Trump administration, unprecedented access to the principals just below the president. It was absolutely amazing. And as I mentioned, it had mainly to do with a very peculiar alignment of stars, friendships, you name it, things that, created a kind of contacts that gave us really a direct access into the decision-making circles in the American government. One of the main reasons, of course, is the Iran mandate. And is the fact that because we are the protecting power of the United States of America in the Islamic Republic of Iran since 1980, we have the kind of insights into what is going on between the two countries that few, if any, other country does have. And we have the kind of contacts with American decision makers that few, if any, countries do have. So that's definitely something that was almost unique. You don't read and see a lot about this, because this is precisely the reason why we still have the mandate. Because we don't speak about it, we never leak, we never speak about what's happening. So whenever you hear something about the role of Switzerland in this particular context, it will have been published either by the American side or by the Iranian side. But we never do, and we never will. This is not going to change with the Biden administration. Will we have access at the same level? Yeah, of course, it's my hope. But we will see. We'll see. But the contacts were really incredible. And we had our president in the White House. We had President Trump twice in Switzerland. We had the Secretary of State Pompeo staying for 4 days in Switzerland. It was truly amazing. It had never happened before between our two countries. So if there is something I definitely could not complain about in my first 1.5 years under the Trump administration, there was the level of contacts we had. That was amazing.
There's just a very positive comment coming in. I so agree with you. Really appreciate a balanced view. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. So that's what people just sent me in. And a next question would be, what role does the World Economic Forum play in building a relationship between Switzerland and the United States?
Well, let me ask a very blunt question. How many times do we manage to have half the American cabinet in Switzerland for 3 days? Well, once a year, and that's Davos. And I do personally think that Davos is certainly one of the really important moments for Swiss foreign policy, for our position in the world, because it gives us, and especially it gives our Federal Council, access to people they would never see otherwise, or not often so. So yes, Davos is an incredible opportunity to network, and Davos is an incredible opportunity to advertise Switzerland, and not, I mind you, not the mountains and the cheese and tourism, and which are important too. And I love cheese and I love mountains and I love tourism, but it's also the occasion to present a different Switzerland, a totally international Switzerland that is connected to the rest of the world, that is extremely creative, that is multicultural, multinational, with an incredibly competitive industry, not just in one or two fields, but in so many different fields. And every time we gather the political and economic elite of the world in Davos, we get the chance to advertise this particular Switzerland. So I know some people are not terribly happy about the World Economic Forum because it is seen as by conspiracy theorists as being the place where all these horrible guys are planning how to dominate the planet. But in fact, it's a little bit different. It's also an opportunity to have informal contacts, to get people who don't talk to each other, to talk to each other suddenly in the privacy of a chalet somewhere. And but personally, I'm, even if I'm not totally fan of being there myself, because it's quite a hassle, but I think it's extremely useful.
Mr. Ambassador, maybe a last question. We are coming close to the end. Do you know what kind of view Biden has about Switzerland, or maybe all people around him? In the past, we had, some issues with democratic-run governments in the US, banking secrecy and other things. Do we have to expect similar developments under Biden?
There is this old legend that traditionally Democrats would be a pain in the neck for Switzerland and Republicans wouldn't. And this is mainly based on two major issues. One was the dormant accounts, and the other one was the banking secrecy. Well, in both cases, frankly, it happens that the crisis reached its peak under a Democratic administration. I do not think that a Republican administration would have behaved very differently. If we look at the banking crisis, when the question is to assert America's right to know what its taxpayers are earning, where they have been hiding the money, I'm not too sure it would have been fundamentally different. Do the people around the Biden administration know and appreciate Switzerland? We don't know, because we don't know who is going to be in charge so far. The vice president has been to Switzerland. Of course, he knows our country. Does he have a particularly close relationship to Switzerland? No. But some people who might be around him in government do. And our hope is to try and build on these particular relationships to make sure that Switzerland doesn't disappear from the American foreign policy radar.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, I'm afraid time is up. We have to come to an end. I'm sorry for that, because that was very interesting, fascinating discussion. I'm very grateful that you joined in tonight with us. Thank you also very much, Francis Bouchard in Washington, for your assistance and your questions and comments, which were extremely useful as well. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the Zurich Insurance Group for supporting this event. Now, no food, no drinks. That's the downside of internet. Usually we do it, not tonight. I hope you liked it. If you did, please tell it to other people. You can have access to the video from tomorrow on the homepage of the Europa Institute at the University of Zurich. Thank you for joining in, and good night.